Welcome to the Docker tutorial. I'm going to use Ubuntu for this tutorial, but most of the things I'm going to talk about should apply to most Linux distros, and apart from the installation itself, it should also apply to Windows and Mac. So let's get started by opening a web browser and head over to docs.docker.com. And let's dive right in by choosing Get Started. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is to download and install Docker. So I'm on Linux, so I'll choose the Linux option and I'm going to open it in a new tab. And let's see how we can download and install Docker for a Linux system. Now, if we take a look at the navigation bar on the left, we can see that right now we're under the Docker desktop category. But personally, I don't really find the Docker desktop that useful, especially on Linux. So I'm not going to install any of the Docker desktop stuff, and I'm just going to minimize it and go directly with the Docker engine. And here I'm going to choose install, and we get the instructions to install the Docker engine. So let's scroll down. And there are instructions for many Linux distros. I'm going to choose Ubuntu as this is what I'm on right now. And we're just going to follow these instructions to install the Docker engine on Ubuntu. So these are the supported Ubuntu versions. I'm using Gemi 22.04, so we're okay. And first we should make sure that we don't have any old versions of Docker, so we can run this line. But since I never had Docker on this specific computer, I'm going to skip this step. And here we get the instructions for the installation itself. So let's open the Linux terminal and put the instructions on one side and the terminal on the other side. And let's start copying the instructions. We now need to add Docker's official GPG key, so let's run these commands. And we now need this command, so let's copy it as well. And we're ready for the installation of the Docker engine itself. So let's move on. We need to update our system again. And now we can go ahead and install Docker itself. Great, and the Docker installation is basically done. Let's move on. Here we're told how to install a specific version of Docker, but we already installed the latest one, so we don't need this. Let's move on. And now we can verify that Docker was installed correctly. To do that, we're going to run this container, and this is a container that's based on the Hello World image. It's a very small image, and its sole purpose is to make sure that the Docker installation indeed succeeded. So let's run this command. And it will download the Hello World image and run a container that's based on this image. So it can find the image locally and it downloads it from Docker Hub. And then a container that's based on this image was created and ran. And let's make a terminal full screen. And we got hello from Docker. This message shows that your installation appears to be working correctly. So Docker is installed on our system. Let's move on. We don't need any of this because this is an alternative for the installation. So let's skip it. And what we now need is to continue to post installation steps for Linux. So let's choose that. And all we need to do from here is, let's move on, this. We need to add our user to the Docker group. This way we won't have to type sudo for every single Docker command. It's more convenient this way, so let's run this command. And the user was added to the Docker group and we're basically done. Let's reboot our system for the group changes to take effect. Great, and the computer was restarted. Let's open the terminal again. And let's try to run a Hello World Docker container once again, but this time without sudo. And we got the same message as before, but this time we didn't use sudo, which means that our installation is successful and our user belongs to the Docker group. The next thing I want to do is install Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code has a great extension for Docker, which is going to be very useful and make things much simpler. So let's download and install Visual Studio Code. Great, and we now have Visual Studio Code installed. Let's run it. And let's open the Extensions tab. And here I'm going to look for Docker. And the one we want is the first one, the most popular one by Microsoft. And we can see that this extension is recommended because we have Docker installed. So let's go ahead and install it. Great. And as you can see, we now have a new tab over here with a Docker icon. So let's click on it. And over here, we can see all of the containers that we currently have, as well as all of the images. And right now we have two containers over here, and both of them are of the Hello World image. And that's because we created and ran two containers of this image. Now, if we hover over any of them, let's say the first one, we can see the image, which is Hello World, and some other details, which are none right now. And here are the details for the second container as well, which is of course of the very same image. And under images, we have the Hello World image. That's the only image we downloaded this far, so let's open it. And you can see that we have the latest version of the Hello World image. And here are the associated containers. These are the containers that are made of this image. Let's make this tab a bit bigger. And you can see that the state for both of these containers is exited because they ran and then they stopped and exited. So that's their state. We can use the prune command from here to remove non-active containers. So let's try it. And we're asked if we're sure that we want to remove all stopped containers. We are, so let's choose remove. And we can see that both of these containers were removed because they were in the exited state. So right now we have no containers. Let's now refresh our images. And if we now hover over our image, we can see that it has no associated containers. Let's now try running a container. So let's choose run image. And right now we only have one image, Hello World. So this is the image that we're going to use. And we only have one tag for it, latest. So let's choose it. And you can see that it was ran. We didn't see the output because it was ran with this flag, the -d flag, which is detached, which means that this container ran in the background. We also don't see it in the list because it ran with this flag, --rm, which means that once the container is done, it is removed from the containers list.